Good morning, everyone. Welcome to the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee's online worship service on this Easter Sunday. I'm Reverend Jennifer Nordstrom, and I'm honored to serve as the First Unitarian Society of Milwaukee's senior minister. We welcome people of all genders, sexualities, ages, races, ethnicities, histories, and bodies. We welcome your mind, your heart, and your spirit. We welcome all you're bringing with you today and all your heart longs to set down. We'd like to pay a special welcome to guests who are joining us today. If you're visiting for the first time or if you're joining us from far away, why don't you say hello now in the chat and tell us where you're joining us from. I welcome you in to our worship service this morning by inviting you to repeat our first church mission after me. We gather to nurture the spirit, engage the mind, and inspire action. Our opening words this morning are from the poem Wondrous by Sarah Freely. I'm driving home from school when the radio talk turns to E.B. White, his birthday, and I exit the here and now of the freeway at rush hour, travel back into the past where my mother is reading to my sister and me the part about Charlotte laying her eggs and dying. And though this is the 5th time Charlotte has died, my mother is crying again, and we're laughing at her because we know nothing of loss and its sad math. How every subtraction is exponential, how each grief multiplies the one preceding it, how the author tried 17 times to record the words, "She died alone," without crying. 17 takes and a short walk during which he called himself ridiculous, a grown man crying for a spider he'd spun out of silk thread of invention. Wondrous how those words would come back and make him cry, yes, and wondrous to hear my mother's voice 10 years after the day she died. The catch, the rasp, the gathering up before she could say to us, "I'm okay." Let's go now to our beloved sanctuary to light the chalice, the symbol of Unitarian Universalism.
I am Reverend Kimberly, your Minister of Religious Education, and I am delighted to read to you a story called The Robot and the Bluebird by David Lucas. There once was a robot with a broken heart. The others did their best to fix him, but it wasn't any good. So he was sent to sit on the scrap heap with all the other old machines. He tried talking to them. He said, "My heart was broken, you know," but they didn't answer. So he lay down and he looked at the sky. He lay there through the long, dark nights and the empty days. He lay there rusting in the autumn rain. He lay there when the first snows of winter fell. And there, one day, was a bluebird. Fighting against the freezing wind, she landed on his shoulder. "What are you doing there, little bird?" he said. "I'm flying south," she said weakly, "south where the sun shines. But I'm so cold and tired. I can't go any further." "I'm sure you do not want to stay here," said the robot. "I'm rubbish." But the bluebird just shivered and said nothing. "There's a space where my heart used to be," said the robot gently. "You could sleep there if you like." So the bluebird settled down to sleep on a nest the robot made. And as the robot looked out into the night, he was astonished to feel that he had a warm, living, beating heart. And when the bluebird fluttered, he felt as if his own heart were fluttering. The next morning, the door to his heart opened, and the bluebird sang, sweet and bright in the icy air. "My old heart only ever said tick-tock," said the robot, "but now my heart is singing." The bluebird flew a little way into the air, and the robot felt like his heart was flying. And creaking, he got to his feet and danced a creaky, clanky dance. "I wish I could live in your heart," said the bluebird, "but I die of cold if I stay here. Winter has come so soon, and I still have so far to go. I don't know if I have the strength," she said sadly, settling into his hands. "Then let me carry you," said the robot. "I'll carry you in my heart and shelter you from the cold and the storms." And so he carried her in his heart, across the frozen wastes, over the towering mountains, through the blizzards and fog, until he was deathly tired and his joints groaned with every step. And when at last the sun shone, he opened the door to his heart, and out flew the bluebird, singing and twittering thank yous. The robot lifted his arms toward her, but he could make one more step. His strength at last had failed. "Make your home in my heart," he said in the faintest of whispers, and he hung his head. The bluebird lived in his heart always, and the robot stands there still, his arms outreached like an old hollow tree, home every year to singing birds. The end.
Tongues of flame fall from the burning bush and set the ground alight. Soon their flame will be covered over with a soft coat of white. But come the spring, green leaves are turning. In the spring, come what may, some bright day when this dark winter's over, green leaves return in the spring. Songbirds have begun their fall migration, blowing like bright leaves through the sky. But when the warm winds blow again up our way, their song returns in the spring. In the spring, their song returning. Come the spring, come what may. Until then, we must embrace the quiet. Their song returns in the spring. All my friends keep their distance now. It's still not safe to draw near. All around, the dark storm still raging. Perhaps we'll be together in the spring. In the spring, perhaps the summer. In the fall, come what may. Sing and dance and break bread together. We'll be together in the spring. Come the spring, perhaps the summer. In the fall, come what may. Some bright day, when this dark winter's over, we'll be together in the spring. We'll be together in the spring.
Dear ones, because of the unprecedented times in which we are living, and the ways all our lives are being touched by the grief and the loss of this global coronavirus pandemic, we're continuing our practice of lighting the COVID candle for any of our members who have had a loved one die during this period, either from COVID or another cause. If you've had a loved one die from any cause during this time and would like to have the COVID candle lit for them during Sunday worship, contact one of the ministers. Gordy Miller's stepmother, Evelyn Miller, died peacefully on March 10th, 2021 from non-COVID respiratory failure at the age of 92 years old. Gordy Miller's dear friend of 59 years, Christian A. Nelson, aka C.A. Nelson, died of cancer at the end of January 2021 at the age of 77 years old. It is our pandemic practice to light our COVID candle to honor the lives and deaths of members' loved ones during the COVID-19 pandemic. Today, we light our COVID candle in honor of Gordy Miller's stepmother, Evelyn Miller, and his friend of 59 years, Christian A. Nelson. As we enter now into a time of meditation, followed by silence, followed by the song Spirit of Life, I invite you to just take a minute to find yourself in your body and get comfortable there, whatever that means. Maybe it means taking a deep breath and let your breath moving in and out bring you into being here and now. Maybe it means feeling your feet on the ground and that steady, stable earth holding you up. Or maybe it means feeling your crown, the tip top of your head, connecting to all that is. Whatever it means for you to be settled in your body, go ahead and do it now. Spirit of life and love, Holy One, of our being and our becoming, that which is sacred within, among, and beyond us. Bring us the breath of resurrection on this Easter Sunday. To all who are mourning, all who are exhausted, all who have experienced loss this year, bring the warmth of comfort and the breath of hope. It has been a long winter, a long year of pandemic, and so many and so much has been lost. May we honor our grief with the memory of the love that inspired it, and with hope for more love in our future. May we find promises of new life all around us, in green shoots coming out of the ground, in vaccinations, in the love of our people. May we rise with it. May it be so, and amen.
Good morning. My name is Miles Schuler, and I have the pleasure of serving as worship associate today. I used the start of the pandemic as an opportunity to reconnect with old friends. It was a time to catch up while processing this new experience with others who were also living through it. By mid to late summer, though, my job began requiring me to have a lot more face-to-face time. That quickly filled up my already low threshold of social interaction. I started putting off replies to my friends for a few days, then a few weeks, and then a couple months. I just had no energy to interact with people over text anymore. This really frustrated me. I reasoned that maybe I didn't care enough about those relationships to keep them up. After all, I was still talking with my 4 or 5 close friends on a regular basis. But I knew this wasn't true. Of course I cared about those other relationships. Well, maybe it was because I had nothing to talk to them about. My job had ended, and I was failing to find what I was going to do next. Every day was the same. Wake up, eat, watch TV, eat, stress about jobs, go to sleep. I didn't have the energy to do anything else, let alone talk with people. This pattern continued until the week between Christmas and New Year's. I went with my family to our cabin in the Northwoods, my happy place. I decided to put off thinking about jobs while I was there, instead focusing on keeping myself engaged during the day. I took daily walks with my dog, showered regularly, and worked on a personal project I put aside a couple months before. Another goal I had for this trip was to reach out again to friends I put to the side, but this desire was rooted in anger towards myself for not sucking up my feelings and keeping the conversation going. A few days in, I realized that this anger was stopping me from moving forward with my own life. I decided to forgive myself and let those relationships go for the moment, giving me a renewed sense of freedom. With that release, I started feeling better and allowed myself to picture potential jobs while I was still at the cabin. With my new skill of letting go, I tried out a new approach. Previously, I hadn't applied to anything from fear of going down the wrong path, but this time I focused on short-term seasonal positions that would let me dip my toes in my desired field. One night, as I was enjoying my cabin and hoping to stay longer, I thought of my nearby summer camp. Lo and behold, they had an opening for a summer position that I was perfectly qualified for. The situation seemed too perfect to pass up. I would have a low-commitment job, secure a full summer in the Northwoods, and still be gaining relevant experience in youth programming. That was my first application since my last job ended, and it led me on a path of finding other youth programs to apply to. When that didn't turn up many options, I altered my search to general education programs. After a month of applying to places, I finally got my first interview. The job wasn't exactly what I had in mind, and to be honest, it was kind of a throwaway application, but it was something. Well, that interview went well, and I was offered another, and I soon found myself researching other adult education jobs and grad school programs. It sparked something in me that the other jobs didn't, and I was finally able to let go of a path in life that wasn't meant to be. Now that I'm in a better place mentally, I've started reaching out to those friends I had to let go of to move forward. Some have responded, while others haven't, which I understand. They might be in a place where they can't reach out, and that's okay. I see that darker time of late 2020 as the reason I was able to take my first step down an unexpected career path. It helped me to stop putting pressure on myself and go for things I wouldn't have tried otherwise. And as for losing some friends, I now see that sometimes you have to let go so you can grow.
Thank you so much, John Stano, for that beautiful song, Ghost Sanctuary, and for the opportunity to see our sanctuary this morning. "Where's Papa going with that axe?" said Fern to her mother as they were setting the table for breakfast. "Out to the hog house," replied Mrs. Arable. "Some pigs were born last night." "I don't see why he needs an axe," continued Fern, who was only 8. "Well," said her mother, "one of the pigs is a runt. It's very small and weak, and it will never amount to anything, so your father's decided to do away with it." "Do away with it?" shrieked Fern. "You mean kill it? Just because it's smaller than the others?" Fern pushed a chair out of the way and ran outside. The grass was wet and the earth smelled of springtime. Fern's sneakers were sopping by the time she caught up with her father. "Please don't kill it," she sobbed. Tears ran down her cheeks, and she took hold of the axe and tried to pull it out of her father's hand. "Fern," said Mr. Arable, "I know a lot more about raising a litter of pigs than you do. A weakling makes trouble. Now run along." "But it's so unfair," cried Fern. "The pig couldn't help being born small, could it? If I had been very small at birth, would you have killed me?" Mr. Arable smiled. "Certainly not," he said, looking down at his daughter with love. "But this is different. A little girl is one thing. A runty little pig is another." "I see no difference," replied Fern, still hanging on to the axe. An odd look came over John Arable's face. He seemed almost ready to cry himself. "All right," he said. "You go back to the house, and I'll bring the runt when I come in. I'll let you start it on a bottle, like a baby." This is the opening scene of Charlotte's Web, the beloved 1952 children's book by E.B. White that tells the story of a friendship between a pig named Wilbur and a spider named Charlotte. Soon after it was published, reviewer Eudora Welty wrote in the New York Times Book Review that it was a book about, quote, "friendship on earth, affection and protection, adventure and miracle, life and death, trust and treachery, pleasure and pain, and the passing of time." A year has passed now since the pandemic began. A year of life and death, trust and treachery, pleasure and pain. In that year, we've lost so much. Connections, love, time with one another, life we planned to mark differently at graduations and births and anniversaries. The worst of it, though, has been death's visitation. The unconscionable, unfathomable nearly 3 million deaths from the disease, as well as the non-COVID deaths that have taken place during this time without the rituals of gathering and mourning that we need as human beings. The Christian story of Easter that we mark this Sunday is a ritual retelling of a story about the human experience of death and the perpetual hope for resurrection. It's a pathway for people to make sense of one of the most painful aspects of being human, our mortality. In Charlotte's Web, After Fern saves the little pig from slaughter, a spider named Charlotte also has to save him from another, different untimely death. The book follows the story of their friendship and Charlotte's work to help Wilbur the pig become a prize-winning fair pig and thereby prevent him from becoming bacon. Then, despite her good life, well lived, and her heroic work to save the life of her friend, the book culminates with Charlotte facing her own death at the end of the season. It's a lot of death for a children's book. And while the characters manage to prevent violent and early death for Wilbur, they can't stop the natural life cycle and death of Charlotte. According to Michael Sims, in the 2011 book he wrote, The Story of Charlotte's Web, E.B. White actually faced pressure from the publishing company to remove Charlotte's death from the book because they were worried it was too difficult for children to handle. But the publisher's fears about children's ability to understand and deal with death were not borne out by the book's young readers. In a review in the New Yorker right after the book came out, Kincaid wrote of a 10-year-old boy's response to it. After a period of unusual silence in his room, broken by occasional loud laughs, he emerged with his face drawn, but under rigid control. "It's terrible to say goodbye to Charlotte," he said. When I read Charlotte's Web in grade school, I remember weeping at the end of the book when Charlotte died. This wasn't because I couldn't handle Charlotte's death, however. It was because I understood it. Through that book, I understood the tender tragedy that death is a part of life. And while it's inevitable, it's also, as the little boy said, terrible. It was a holy and sacred introduction to this truth. Ultimately, E.B. White held his ground with the publishers, insisting that children are capable of understanding death. Indeed, White hoped his novel would help children understand how death is woven into the fabric of life, and that by understanding death better, they might better understanding the fullness of life, its tenderness and its tragedy, its trust and its treachery, its pleasure and its pain. I imagine he helped some adults understand this more clearly as well. We are still in the midst of the pandemic. Even though we might be beginning to see the tendrils of hope floating up at the edges of the eastern horizon, we're not yet at shining dawn. This time that we're living in is the Easter story's time of the empty tomb, when the stone has been rolled away and we look in to find the tomb empty. We do not know what has happened. We do not know what comes next. The pain of loss, the reality of death's sting is still deeply with us. Even if we believe dawn is coming, there's no denying the pain of what we've been through. After the story of Charlotte's Web was published, author Michael Sims did an interview on NPR where he recounted how when E.B. White was recording the 1970 audiobook version of Charlotte's Web, quote, "Every time he broke down when he got to Charlotte's death, the producer took him to walk outside and E.B. White would go and say, 'This is ridiculous. A grown man crying over the death of an imaginary insect.' And then he would go in to record and start crying again when he got to that moment. He took 17 takes to get through Charlotte's death without his voice cracking or beginning to cry. There is no fixing or saving us from the reality of our mortality. There is no stopping the grief from the loss of our loved ones. We have been exposed by the losses of this year, and many of us come to this Easter Sunday raw and exhausted. While death is part of life, this year, death was brutal and unyielding in its sweep across the globe. Loss of loved ones and our own inevitable mortality mixed in this year with smaller and yet so often heart-rending losses of time and passion and connection and dreams. In the Easter story, as it's told in the book of John, it's Mary Magdalene who comes to the empty tomb first. She is wild with grief, and when she finds the tomb empty, she runs out to her community, crying out to them that they have taken the body of her beloved Jesus, and she doesn't know where they have put him. Other disciples run to the tomb to see what has happened, and they all have different reactions to its emptiness. In this time of the empty tomb, how do we react when we don't know what has happened? What do we assume? When we don't know what will come, what do we expect? We are too close to the pandemic. We are still in its midst to be able to fully see and understand its meaning yet. One of the reasons Unitarian Universalists struggle with the Easter story is because it's weird. But what if we approached the story not as a literal explanation of physical experience, not as supernatural, but rather as something weird, something mysterious or mystical or metaphorical? In the story, when Jesus returns to the disciples, he is unrecognizable to them. Disciple after disciple sees someone or something else when Jesus comes to them before they can see Jesus in that person. Before we can see or understand what will be resurrected or what will be born, what kind of unimaginable new life, unimaginable resurrection will happen after this pandemic, we have to travel through the valley of the shadow of death. We have to lose things, lose people, lose who we were before this, before the new life comes. When Mary enters the empty tomb, she assumes Jesus is a gardener, and she asks him where he has taken Jesus' body. But then Jesus calls her name. He says, Mary. And she sees him. She gasps and she cries, Teacher. But he tells her she cannot hold on to him, for he has to go. Her job is to tell the community he is risen. Becoming requires letting go of that which we love. Becoming requires releasing things we have loved deeply. It is terrible. It is devastating. And it is the truth of life. In this church, we may have to let go of some of the things we have loved deeply to become who we need to be after this. A church that serves people within our walls, but also beyond them, both in the community and virtually. Once we're able to safely gather again in person, and our COVID team is still working on a policy for when and how we'll be able to do that, they will communicate that policy with you just as soon as they have it, I promise. When we are able to safely gather again in person, we may need to let go of resistance to technology and worship so that we can bring a more dynamic experience to people who are joining us virtually, whether that be for health or safety or geographic reasons. We may have to let go of some of our borders, some of our attachment to how we do things, to become a church that serves people within and beyond our walls. I honestly don't know what we will become together. I don't know what life will look like for me, or for you, or for us, or for the world around us after the pandemic. But what I do know is that something new is being born. The story of spring, the story of Easter, the story of life, all tell another truth. Despite death, new life is continuously being born and is always on the rise. In Charlotte's Web, Charlotte dies right after giving birth to a new generation of baby spiders. E.B. White writes that in the barn with Wilbur, quote, Charlotte's children and grandchildren and great-grandchildren year after year lived in the doorway. Each spring, there were new little spiders hatching out to take the place of the old. Most of them sailed away on their balloons, but always 2 or 3 stayed and set up life in the doorway. Dear ones, here we are, in the doorway. The stone has been rolled away and the tomb is empty. We do not know what will come next. It's mysterious. But I promise you this. New life is becoming right now. May we grieve what we have lost, and may we let go so that we might embrace that new life fully, celebrate it, and sing the miraculous song of hope. Hallelujah. Life rises again. Amen. And may it be so.
1, 2, 3. Can't find the glide that was in my stride. Can't find the bridge to the other side. My mind's on vacation, take my body too. Go walking across the water like we used to do. Hands clapping, toes tapping, heart in mind. Body swaying back and forth in time. They're rocking it on the patio. They're kicking off their shoes and at the Holiday Motel like they always do. Fireflies and stars light up the bay. Fireflies and stars light up the bay. Might never be no superstar, but I got you. I got some good guitar. Sometimes despite myself I find the groove. Start dancing like a farmer man, then I got to move.
Thank you all so much for your generosity. Pledges are at the core of our congregation's spiritual practice of generosity. We're also grateful for additional gifts to support our ministry and thank the folks out there who are appreciating this online ministry and are supporting it either by texting 73256 with the message "Give to you," or who are giving on our website. Your gifts help us continue to provide this ministry. We also share the plate with an organization each month. The League of Women Voters is our April Share the Plate recipient. The local chapter of the National League of Women Voters was founded in 1920. Their mission is to encourage informed and active participation in government and influence public policy through education and advocacy. To donate directly to the League of Women Voters, please go to their website at lwvmilwaukee.org and select the donate button. You can see all these options on your screen right now, and they'll also live on in the YouTube comments section of this video after worship is over. So thank you so much for giving either right now or when you intentionally come back later to get those links. Your support keeps us and our community partners going. Thank you. Our closing words today are the poem Good Night, Willie Lee. I'll See You in the Morning by Alice Walker. Looking down into my father's dead face for the last time, Mother said, without tears, without smiles, without regrets, but with civility, Good night, Willie Lee. I'll see you in the morning. And it was then I knew that the healing of all our wounds is forgiveness that permits a promise of our return. Dear ones, may you experience the promise of return today. I love you. Amen, and may it be so.
We are going, heaven knows where we are going. We know within, and we will get there. Heaven knows how we will get there, but we know we will. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah. Whoa, yeah, yeah.